Welcome to Undesign, the podcast where we deconstruct and demystify the world of UX. This is Ashima.
My name is Hiba. We are your hosts with over 15 years of combined experience in human centered design.
Today, we're going to be focusing just on design maturity. What is it? What do you need to look for when you are looking for a job? Or some red flags when you are interviewing with a company? What are some telltale signs of whether a company has the design maturity you're looking for? And also, vice versa, how to achieve design maturity in your company, whether you're a team lead, whether you are a startup, or you are just starting out. So let's dive in.
Perfect. And I think this is a very crucial aspect that, at least for myself, I realized in hindsight. It wasn't something that I knew before when I first started into my design career. But now that I'm kind of researching and understanding and having all these experiences, I'm realizing like how much you can tell from a company and a team and the maturity of that team just by understanding the models, because there are a couple of models that we're going to talk about later in this episode. But I guess if you take this episode and take away something from it, I guess as a designer, maybe there is something for you to learn in terms of assessing the type of places you want to apply to and work with. And as a founder or someone who's starting a startup or a product, maybe learn if you want, like, how to do stuff or maybe how not to do stuff. But I would actually like to start it with a personal experience, an experience with. I'm pretty sure a lot of you might have gone through it before, getting into a company or a team and then realizing that everything I learned in school about evidence-based design and about like doing user research and all of that is just not it's not clicking with the team, and that definitely created some stress for me. Going into the real world, it definitely was like a shock for me. Is this something you had, Ashima, as well, or uh,
Yeah,
is
absolutely.
that something just
Absolutely.
like unique to my experience?
No, it's very common, and it is the reason that I became a mentor. Going out into the real world and practicing design, you definitely get hit with this reality check of how everybody else thinks design is a buzzword. Also, it has a lot to do with the timing of us entering the field. I think Hiba and I entered the field when it was much younger, it was much newer, and it was just starting to catch on as a buzzword. And a lot of companies wanted UX designers, and they would hire people whom they didn't understand their background. They didn't understand what UX was. They didn't understand that design is more than visuals. And it was really hard to bridge that gap and educate, because I feel like more senior designers, if you are already a mentor, you probably face this as well. You've probably had to put your foot down at several instances. You've had to advocate for your designs. You've had to advocate for your process. And that's something that I had to do almost everywhere. And it was really getting to me. It was actually really messing up my mental health. And I felt like if I do this anymore and if I have these expectations from these companies anymore, it isn't going to be good for me. So I am going to have to do something and bridge this gap another way. I'm going to have to raise awareness, and I'm going to have to mentor. And that's how it all started. And then mentorship is a whole other ball game. So if you are a mentor out there and if you are trying to raise awareness about design, about the design process, or if you're in a company that you feel like you're surrounded by people who don't value this process, I think it's very important to reassess and see whether you really want to continue there, or if the impact you're making to the product is worth your time and your effort. So yeah, that's something I had to do very early on. Oh, I have to say that the company that I joined immediately after graduating was mobile. Back then they were Sprint, and they had their processes in place. So I was a little spoilt with my first job, and it was a harder blow for me going from grad school, where I'm surrounded by people who really want to learn about these processes, to Sprint, where they had just finished up a round of restructuring to an agile and Scrum. Really, they were starting to follow Scrum by the time I got there. And then moving to a great startup. However, their systems were not in place. They had great funding, and they had been around for 10 years. So this was a well established startup. However, despite being out of the Bay Area, their operations were all outsourced. And it was really hard for me to get through to the people I was working with the dev team. I think because it was a startup, I could reach out to the CEO and the MD directly and have a chat with them and tell them that this isn't working, this is what we need to be doing. However, there was a very strong disconnect, and I can see you want to say something. Go ahead.
Hmm? No, I was just actually testing the mute mic.
Okay.
I was not trying to interrupt. I was just like, oh my god, am I on
Okay,
mute
cool.
or not? But you definitely brought a very important point here, because you would think that if you're working in a certain area or a certain industry or like a startup, or let's say from the Bay Area. I mean, I've had the privilege of um, going on a trip sponsored by KU to the top tech companies and being there. And it was like more of like 3 days, 4 days kind of trip. And we met with product teams and product managers, and Instagram, Pinterest, Twitter, Facebook, all Google, and all these companies. But it was very apparent to me that there was a lot of emphasis on, how can you say it in the, like, at least that was in 2016, 20, yeah, 2016. There was not a lot of emphasis on the product and design. So I was like in a team full of students who are business business students and engineering students, and all these students who had the a very clear path on, like, oh, if you come here, these are the opportunities we have. For me as a designer, I think I was it's just me and another person, and we had no idea. Like, there was nothing that was directed to us in terms of like, oh, here is how you can become someone there. And I'm not saying that they did not have roles. I'm just saying in terms of like how they put the emphasis during that trip on the roles that they wanted to attract. Even when I went to Dubai and worked there, and I've worked at the US, I've always thought, is like, okay, maybe if I go there, it's better. But no matter like how, no matter how many teams I worked with in different countries, it is still the fundamental aspect of like having very minimal awareness, close to even none, around the role of design. Unless you're working for a design agency where their main offering is structured around design, I think as a designer, you would have this challenge of trying to communicate. And but also at the same time, that puts a little bit of pressure on you because you're just trying to convince other teams and management of why you are important and why you're hired. And sometimes you would be really surprised that they hired you to make slides pretty, or like they hired you to make like cosmetic changes and not really do the actual valuable aspect of design work, which is something that I think if you enjoy doing cosmetic things, I think all power to you. If you're into UI and not really digging deeper, like into the UX part of it and into like decision making, I think that's where a lot of companies are. But at the same time, you can't really separate having a pleasant experience even in that on that level if the company is not aware of like the importance of like how you take these choices. One model come across by Nelson group where they have the model like the stages of how do you, I guess, measure the maturity of design within a company. And it kind of ranges from, I think it was like more 4 or 5, but it ranges from the first stage where they're not aware at all that design is actually something that you could utilize as like a capability or a talent. And then towards more of like reactive. So they're just reacting to what they get, but it's not really integrated. It's more of like afterthought. And then you go like a step ahead or above where there is a design team and there is a budget for them, but at the same time they're not included in the business like decisions in the strategy, and it's very isolated, so it's not very well integrated. And then there is a level where you have the team, they have their own budget, they can report to the strategy team and everything, but at the same time it's they don't necessarily inform in a way as like, okay, we're going to inform the product or the business strategy by that. It's kind of like, okay, it's a nice to have, okay, let us know what you think. And I think the top part or the top stage is where you actually build the whole company or like the whole offering or business around the design team, because the design team is what informs your strategy. And I think that's kind of like from what I saw in some of the reports is just 5% of the companies that use design that they're on that level.
Yeah, I feel like I've definitely seen these stages. At that point, of course, I didn't categorize them this way because there was a company that I believe they were Norwegian. And so their main operations were in Norway, but they were hiring for a position in India. And so they understood what is design and that there's a process to it. And they set up an interview and they had me do like a sample design and rate it. However, while interviewing with them, I was I felt like I was over explaining, and I felt like I was using terms that they weren't understanding. And to the point that when they finally did assess, and they assessed me on the spot, they said, okay, yeah, your assessments come back. You're going to be a junior designer. And I'm like, but you didn't understand anything that I said. And when I asked you, how do you implement it? I didn't really get an answer that I was convinced with. I didn't believe in your process. And they got really offended. so so I have to say that there's also like the other end of the spectrum where they feel like they understand it
Mm.
and they expect the best who are out there in the market to come and apply. And so if you're in that stage where you're interviewing, you might be hit by this. Don't be alarmed. I know that a lot of you who are applying are graduates from boot camps, and it's not a bad thing. It's just that you get to interact with fewer peers, with fewer people who are out there in the industry. So I think, and that's right now in 2023. I don't know if that's going to change. I really hope that changes. And I hope that we are going to reach a stage where people understand that with design, there may not be an algorithm like how there is in business and
Mm,
engineering, but there are rules of thumb.
yeah.
And that's where heuristics come in. And that's where I think that somewhere there's a very big disconnect. And that leads me to, if you are a business starting out, how do you understand design maturity? How do you implement systems which lead to design decisions that impact your product in a way that you can actually make those sales, that you can make your product sticky, that you can start to onboard more customers? How do you do that? And before we get there, I actually had a question to Hiba. I was wondering if you felt that if we change some of the words around, the semantics around the way we describe design processes, do you feel like businesses would start to understand better?
Yeah, I definitely think that this is one of the factors that are kind of bringing more confusion, because if you think about it, sometimes it's not about that they don't understand. It's more of like there is a level where the leadership, they're not aware at all of design. Like their perception of design is just like pretty things. But there is another level where like they understand that it's important, but they get confused. And when you mentioned the interview part, I definitely relate, because sometimes I'm interviewing with companies or with teams, and I'm talking to the director, and the director has no idea what their process is like, and they have no idea what the systems are like. And to me, when I was like at the beginning of my career, I'm like, oh my God, I must be the stupid person, because we're not connecting with each other. And I just assumed it was my mistake for not kind of resonating or saying something that would resonate. But I guess the problem with the confusion that comes to the language and the semantics, um, because I'm working with a lot of foresight work, a lot of the tools and the techniques that we use has been, it's either design adopted it from foresight or vice versa. So you see a lot of intersection. So with that, it means that there are fundamental stuff, but you just call it something everywhere you go, in different circles and in different rooms. Like, for example, I remember I was hired for a job, and then I was doing user research, and then the project owner or project manager kept referring to it as focus groups, and I was like, no, it's not focus groups. But I get what you're trying to say, but that's not what I'm doing. But how can you, like, it's not as easy as saying no, that's not what it is, because like they're not gonna change their mental model. Their mental model is like, oh, you talk to users, it means it's focus groups. So I guess that's like a conversation on a different level. I'm really curious though about these kind of red flags in an interview, because you touched on that point, and I think we would benefit the listeners and the viewers on what are the type of things that would appear, or if you come across in your interview with a design team or with a like a company or like hiring manager, it would be like a tell sign of like, okay, this company is not really very high on the maturity scale, and I should be aware of that at least. Is there anything that comes to your mind? I'm gonna think of a couple of things while you answer that question.
So, yeah, that's a great question. Telltale signs, honestly, when you go into an interview, I think noticing right off the bat that, okay, well, the interview aligned with the job description, and I was able to actually speak to the role that I applied to. I think that is probably the baseline.
Yeah.
We really want to, understand that the people you're going to be working for and working with understand what your role is going to be, and it's well defined. And you are actually going to be that UX researcher or writer or designer, or even if you've just applied for UI position, you need to be interviewing for the job that has been described. So hopefully that's out of the way and that's your baseline. After that, you really want to be aware of the questions that your interviewer is asking you. So, a general interview that I train my mentees for is you're going to be talking about your experience, and then you're going to be walking through a couple of projects on your portfolio. And if you feel like you don't get to speak to a lot of where your design decisions came from,
Mm,
then they're not looking for that kind of an approach. They're probably looking at your finished screens and your completed prototypes, whether the video works, so that they could sell the product. And that's what you're in for if you do get a job there.
mm,
Another thing that you want to keep in mind when your interviewer is asking questions about your project is, are they able to assess your skills, your soft skills? Because that's very important as well. Are they asking the questions? For example, I, as a product manager, have asked in interviews, how do you how do you hand over to the dev team? How do you receive business requirements? These are important questions to assess your soft skills. I think this is more of a high level, well rounded approach to, are you being asked the right questions? The next step is when you ask them questions, how
mm.
do they respond? How long do they take to respond? And I think one of the very important questions is, what is your process and how do you implement it? What does your week look like? And that's something you can ask as an interviewee. So pay attention to the amount of time that they take to get back to you, and see how quickly they're able to just say, okay, well, we start our week with an all hands meeting, and then we move on to our individual stuff over the next 3 days, and then we regroup on Fridays. And that's what you can expect. That is a usual design team week for you. You want to pay attention to what stands out and what you think could be a major red flag. Now, there could be so many things that honestly are not coming to my mind now. I don't know if you've got
Well, I
some,
have a
Hiba.
couple. Yours were actually really great. I haven't really even thought of these. And it's definitely, you get a lot through this interview process, but also I think even before the interview process, you get to know a lot about the company and the maturity. For example, are they writing like a very vague job description? Because I definitely I've come across some job descriptions where they promote it as like a UX designer, but honestly, everything that they have on this job description was like UI stuff. And I think that was there probably were not understanding a lot of why, or maybe why it was written that way or what they wanted. So I think the job description definitely shows you a lot. The other thing is when you ask them about, like when you go into the interview and try to understand like what is the path of your progression into that company. Are you just going to be doing UX work and not having someone to mentor you, to guide you, so you can develop as a designer and then gain more skills? Or is it like, do they have like very strong design leadership where they can guide you through, okay, you're a junior right now, but this is how you become like a mid-level and then senior, and then like you want to be promoted. I think that's another sign. One of the signs too, I definitely been into interviews where they pride themselves as their, oh, we are a design team, we have this and we have that, but they don't even have the authority to do user research. And I'm talking about like big companies. I'm talking about multi-million dollar companies where they don't have the option to do user research. And to me, that's very alarming because it means that every work that you're doing, how are you taking your decisions and how are you basing it on like the data? It's just mind boggling, honestly. I would really like to explore more the part of startups and if you're trying to create a design team from within. To me, before I hand it to you, Ashima, I think one of the big parts that determines that type of decision is who's paying. Like, where is the money coming from? If the money is coming from like a business person, I'm pretty sure they're more likely to focus on business decisions. Not saying that they would not focus on the experience, but I guess as humans, we're always biased. Us as designers, we're probably going to be more biased to lean towards design as a perspective and as a lens in our work. And same goes to if the founder is someone who is business oriented or someone who is more um, like software development, like a major, or they have that background. Um, so as much as there is a lot of emphasis on like founders, that you have like love story between business bro or like finance bro and then software like a developer bro, and then it's just like a romance that happens in between, and it's just like the perfect match. But nobody talks about designers. I don't know why, even though we bring in, I'm not going to say the most value because I just want to be self-aware here. I think we bring in equal value, but you never see that match. I was like, oh, that was a designer and they were able to do this and that. And I would say in these type of instances, you're a founder, consider bringing in someone who specializes like, in terms of designing experiences, in terms of design strategy, and all of that. Just because if you want to become part of that 5% company, as referred to it, you would have the most success. You would fail fast and cheap rather than building something and realizing that it does not work. And I see Yoshima nodding, so I'm pretty sure you have some tea to share on that,
Yeah,
given the fact
totally.
that you worked in a startup before.
That too, and I've also mentored a startup founder. And this guy, honestly, he had a great vision. I could believe in his product, I could get behind it. However, he didn't understand the ROI of design, of UX. And for him, he felt like he wanted to learn more about design and do it himself, which isn't a bad way to go about it. But you have to understand if you are a sole proprietor or if you're just a partnership with another person, it is a lot of work. And I think, like I said, first familiarize yourself with the ROI of design if you are starting out, and understand that there's a whole process that can help you fail fast and fail cheap, like how Hebo was talking about. It is it's something that you get to validate before you actually build. And that saves a lot. And that's exactly what I was telling this guy. And I think he was also like mind blown. He was just like, how did I not know this? Because he's been through MBA schools and he's recruited from MBA schools. He's outsourced a lot of his like parts of this product to people who are very well qualified, who know what they're doing, who've built great products before. However, nobody took the time to tell him that, hey, if you validate this through research and a prototype now, you don't have to build it out and test it there. You can test with a sample right now. And that's something that I don't know why he didn't know of, because he's been exposed to so many great industry experts. And this was something that really stuck with me because I was slowly realizing that even though you've been to the best business schools or you've been surrounded by people who know their stuff, that doesn't mean that you are exposed to all the processes that will work for your product. And that's something that you really want to first take a look at if you are starting out as a business owner, as someone who's starting to build a product or a service, even. You probably want to understand what is the best way to approach developing and designing it from a designer first, and then starting out on it. A few other startups that I've worked for wanted me to also do their branding, which is fine. I offer that. However, they didn't fully understand that the branding and the product go hand in hand and that it's perceived as one entity. The experience feeds off of the brand, and the brand is the starting point. They kind of gave me these requirements in bits and pieces. And I had to, as the designer, tell them that, okay, well, this is great. I think it's great that you're exploring all of these different facets of the product. However, we need to first start with branding and then move on to UI because UI is based off of branding. So that's another thing that I feel like as designers, we take it for granted that a lot of people who are starting out building a product, they know this, but we do need to kind of be a guide to them. So if you're a business owner, keep in mind that you're probably going to be guided by your designer. So that's the flip side of it. And you really want to make sure that the designer that you hire knows their stuff. So how do you find that out? I'd say one, of course, is their experience speaks for themselves. You want to, of course, hire somebody who has worked in the same industry as you. I think that is hands down something that you will get a good design out of.
I love the last point you mentioned where like how to assess the design talent you want to bring into your team or your startup. That would be a very good example or a topic to talk about, because I think we talk a lot about what to do in the other side, but we don't really provide as much information in terms of like, okay, if you're a founder or if you're someone who's looking to hire a designer, what do you look at? Given the fact that not everybody has the right, or not the right, like the appropriate skill and knowledge to kind of judge based on that. Um, in terms of, I think overall the conversation of like why design maturity is important, because as Ashima mentioned, you really need to have a clear design strategy or a clear design vision, because design informs every aspect of your work, and successful companies they understand that, because every decision that they take is based on these kind of short loops of feedback, that there's like, okay, we're going to create this product, but we're just going to test it before we mass produce or before we kind of send it to everyone, and then you get feedback and then you validate. And if you're interested in that process, you could look into something called design sprints. This is something that I've been doing and I really enjoy it. A lot of people find value in it, like a lot of clients, because in their mind, they're like, oh, I thought that this would take me 6 months to complete. I mean, hell, some companies I worked with, they've been working on products for 2 years just to kill it at the end because they just realize it does not work anymore. So there is value in that. That's just something to look into if you're interested. And I guess the different aspect too, the other part of it is when you have a clear design vision, you know how to measure goals, because this is the design, this is the input, these are the goals, and this is how we're going to test it or how to measure it. The third reason is the culture, because and this is something that a lot of people complain about. I feel like in the design talent world and in the development or like product, because there's always this disconnect. I was like, we're not heard, or we don't feel like our input matters and that kind of stuff. So I think having a high design maturity level within a company promotes that culture of um, being more like integrated, having it. And we're not saying that we're like, us as designers, we want to be like the leaders or the top of the pyramid or the chain. That's not, definitely not the point. It's more of like the process we bring, it brings in much more facilitation and seamless experiences, because we're not spinning in circles, we're not trying to create something without validation and without like immediate feedback. And it's really interesting to hear the story of that guy, or like the founder, where his like mind's blown because of the that kind of tool. So yeah, a lot to talk about. I don't know if we have something else to talk about in terms of the design maturity that we haven't touched on.
So I had honestly, like, we've already covered everything. Just like a closing statement is good, I think.
Yeah, so if you're a designer or a founder, I mean, I'm really fascinated by this idea, and I think even when I was preparing for this episode and just writing my thoughts, I was like, that would be a great episode to kind of make a workshop out of, not only for designers, because I think we definitely can get some like pointers in terms of like interview process and in terms of assessing where to leave, because let's just be honest, sometimes you kind of outgrow your own team or your own company. So having maybe something that is designed around this would be awesome. Also having something for founders, because I realize that there is a huge opportunity for us to kind of work in that space, especially that a lot of people are really becoming more interested into creating products and stuff like that. So it would be great to
Absolutely.
have that learning.
Yeah, definitely. So if you guys are out there listening or watching us right now, feel free to follow us on our Instagrams and follow this space for any updates on when our workshop is going to be. yeah, we'll keep you guys updated, and I think that's really it from my side. If you are applying out there, you really want to end up in a team that is well versed with what they're doing, so you can learn from them, and or if you're a mentor at a senior level and you want to teach, you want to be in a place that they're open-minded and they want to learn. So just keep these things in mind, and we'll see you next time.
We'll see you guys. And oh, one thing I wanted to mention, I'm gonna add all the resources for the models and the articles. So if that's something that you'd like to kind of read or dig deeper into, you'll find the resources in the section below. With that, we'll leave you and see you in the next episode. Bye bye.